The Hunt Lenox globe is one of the world's oldest globes. It dates back to the 1500s. One of the things that makes it so interesting is there's a little inscription on the globe the cartographer put right along the eastern coast of Asia. He wrote 3 words, says, "Here be dragons," which is not normal. Most people would not put that on a map or on a globe of any kind. And to this day, there's speculation about what did he have in mind and why did he write on the globe, "Here be dragons"? Had he heard some legend about dragons in that part of the world and there was just some stories going on, and so he thought, well, I'll put that there? Was he referring to some actual real animal that was like a dragon, maybe lived in the sea or something like that people actually saw but since maybe has become extinct? Or was he just pulling everybody's leg and just thought, I'll put this as a joke to see who actually notices it and it'll become a topic of conversations? Obviously, nobody really knows the truth. I don't know the answer to that question. Nobody else really knows. But I do know that those words spark imagination. Here be dragons. Everybody who's ever looked at that globe and seen those words stop to imagine and go, what was he putting that on there for? There's something that fascinates people about dragons. Even if you go back to your childhood and you look at the good old story of Puff the Magic Dragon, stories that we love. Some dragon stories are great and some are not so great. Some are friendly and some are scary. That's why there's so many dragon stories in literature and mythology. Goodreads recently published a list of the best dragon stories in literature, and there were 302 books on the list. I'm like, could they narrow that down for me just a little bit? I mean, could you give us maybe the top 25 or something like that? But over 300 books about dragons. Do you know what the number 1 is on the list? The Hobbit. The number 1 on their list is The Hobbit. If you've read the book or you've seen the movie, you know that Bilbo Baggins and his friends go on a quest to liberate the kingdom of Erebor and in a terrifying dragon, Smaug, that stands in their way to prevent them. That's often what dragons do. Dragons stand in the way. Dragons try to keep you from going in the direction that is good or right. As we'll see today as we continue in the sermon series of The Quest, we're going to be dealing with a dragon. Last week we shared this with you and we still have more left. So if you weren't here, we have a book that goes along with this series written by Darren Key, who has also shared the sermon series with churches and said, hey, preach it and teach it in your churches. And this is a great book. We have 1 copy for every family until we run out. Let me reiterate that. 1 copy. Don't be that person who hears last week and go, I can get a second copy. They don't know. Okay, we're in church. Be honest. God's watching. So on your way out, if you haven't picked up a copy, I encourage you to do it, especially for small groups. If you're in a small group, this is a book that they're working through. Many of the groups are doing that. Last week, I invited you to go on a quest, a journey, and we set the goal that we want to achieve financial health that honors God. Not just financial health, but because there's a lot of people that teach financial health, and there's a lot of people who do a good job teaching that, but many don't bring in, how do I honor God and how I handle my finances? So that's what we're looking at is we want to be financially healthy, but we want to be healthy in a way that God Almighty would be pleased of what we're doing and how we're living. So that makes it very unique. That's why I spent last week talking about the importance of the yellow brick road, which for us is the Bible. You remember the movie, God's given us clear picture and a path to follow, just like Dorothy and her friends had a quest to find on the Wizard of Oz. We can't go wrong if we stick to God's yellow brick road, the Scriptures. And we allow the Scripture to be the thing that directs our path and directs our decisions. So today, the not so happy news I must share with you is there's a dragon that we have to deal with on our quest. And there's a dragon that we must talk about. It's kind of a mean old dragon. It's an ugly dragon. It has brought misery to millions and millions and millions of people. And the dragon has a name. Do you know what the name is? Debt. The dragon of debt. And all of us in this room either have dealt with that at some level or are in the middle of dealing with that dragon. And by stats that you would read by many different people, probably 80% or more are dealing with debt at some level, but even a greater level. Let me give you a picture, according to Motley Fool, Fool.com, these stats about what's happening in America in some debt areas. Credit cards. We have a debt of over $1 trillion in American culture of credit cards, broken down to a credit card debt of a little over $5,700, and then average store card balances of $1,100 or a little more, nearly $7,000 that we're carrying for just stuff that we bought. Our coffee, our clothes, our going to the movies, our shoes, just odds and ends that we say, well, just run on a credit card, just run on a credit card, just pull out the credit card, just pull out the credit card. There's a large amount of debt, and the average home is having nearly $7,000. Some of you in this room, I know, are sitting here and going, well, ours is less than that, thank you. Some of you in this room are going, my goodness, I'm keeping that average up, I'm above. Okay, and we want to just address that. Like, what do we do with this? When you look at credit card balances by generation, there's some good news for some generations and not so good for others. Gen Z, my 18 to 25-year-olds, can I get a shout? Who's 18 and 25? No one's going to shout. Yeah, there we go. We got one in the house. There's others. They're just not going to be identified. You all are doing pretty good. Look at the numbers up there. You have the smallest amount of debt, credit card balance by the generations, but you kind of notice Gen Zs go up, or Gen Zs there, millennials goes up a little higher. Now, my Gen Xers who are in my generation, raise your hands. Man, we got to do better. We got to do better. I mean, look at the numbers there, $8,000. Baby boomers, it goes down a tad bit, but see, everything's the baby boomers' fault, so we're just following your pattern. And then the silent generation, it goes down. Now, there is a little bit of a pattern here. Someone would say, wait a minute, those Generation Z, don't give them too much credit. They're young. They haven't had many expenses yet. And there's probably some truth to that. Yeah, they may not have kids yet. They may not be married. They may not have all the expenses, so maybe. But let me give you a warning. Gen Zs, if your credit cards are low, keep them that way. Don't let it increase, okay? Don't do like moms and dads, and don't look at Generation Xers and go, I want to be like them. At least not in this area of life. And you can see how from 2021 to 2022, every generation has increased their credit card debt. Part of that could be culture, where we're at, where our economy is at, but we're spending money and putting our credit card. Let's talk about cars. Oh, do we have to? Out in this parking lot, there's a bunch of cars. Several are newer, and several are not quite so new, but the average auto loan debt is over $22,000. New car payment, $725 a month, and the average monthly used car payment is $516. So if you're driving a new car at home and a used car at home, you're probably paying over $1,200 a month. Man, I just get stressed talking about this. Like my heart just gets tight. And then you move into housing debt, your house mortgage and your home equity line of credit, if you have that. So we have over $12 trillion of mortgage debt in the United States, and the average mortgage debt is $236,000. That's probably growing as our housing market continues to go up and up. The average mortgage payment is a little over $1,400 a month, and the average mortgage rate is on a 6.51% interest, and we know that's gone up as interest rates are going up, and the average home equity line of credit is at $41,000. And so just those numbers, just looking at the mortgage and looking at your auto loan, if you add those together, if you're in the average realm, you need to be making $31,000 a year just to pay on your debts. Shoo-wee. That's a lot. That's not taking in what your balance is. I had someone walking out of the building, the first service, and they said, I just got a new credit card. I was like, yeah, okay. They said, because it gets points and da-da-da and everything. They said, do you realize what the interest rate is? I said, no, I don't know what the interest rates are now. They said, well, if I pay it off by this point, it's only 21%, but if I don't get that, it's 29% interest. Wow is right. A little overwhelming. Do you all feel the stress I'm feeling? I was feeling this, putting this together and just doing a little bit of research, jumping around Dave Ramsey's website and Fool.com website, reading these. I was like, oh, okay, breathe, Brian, breathe. Because preacher stands before you today. I can't stand here and tell you I'm debt-free. Wish I could tell you, I'm debt-free. I'm a fellow struggler with you in this American economy that we're in and trying to keep what is balanced, what's not balanced, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. But we got to hear from God's word together because debt is a stress producer. And some of you in this room, I know you walk in today and you're like, is he really talking about this topic? Do I really need to hear this? Because I have enough stress. Matter of fact, that was the topic of discussion in the car on the way here. And it's the topic when we get in, like, how am I going to pay these bills? It's a stress producer. But people who are deep in debt, they tend to worry a lot. And worry is the number one cause of stress. And we know that when stress is not managed well, it can lead to devastating ill effects to our health, to our mental health, physical health, and even to our spiritual health. Because one thing's connected to another thing. And so we have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to look at this, but am I going to do something about it? Debt even causes many marital problems. Surveys show that money problems, which almost always include debt, are the second leading cause of divorce behind infidelity. The second leading cause, like our money was all messed up. It was awful, and so we couldn't handle that. The debt dragon is one bad dude who's looking, how can I destroy your life? For that reason, you think people would run from him and avoid him at all cost. Not generally what happens, though. Why is that? Well, if you saw it, think back to the movie, think back to The Hobbit. Do you remember how slick that cagey dragon was? It wasn't like he just stood up and became a dragon. He was sneaky. Do you remember how Smaug tried to deceive Bilbo Baggins with his smooth speech and with his clever lies? You do it this way, you do it that way, and trying to entrap him and try to pull him. That's exactly what we're up against when we face the idea of debt. There's always a grand promise of happiness and fulfillment and assurances that you don't have anything to worry about. Just buy where you want to buy. The debt says, oh, don't worry about these payments. They don't even start until after Christmas. That's why I like to preach a financial series with this time of year, because we're moving towards that Christmas season when many of us go, but I love them. I got to buy a little of this, a little of that, a little of this. And then January comes, you're like, do I love them that much? That's what we start wrestling with. I mean, that's the truth, isn't it? How many times do we do that and go, oh, okay, I bought too much at Christmas time, and since you've got them spread out over 7 years, what big deal is it? I'm not really paying that much for that new whatever I just bought. Yes, the debt dragon's real and very sneaky. And we have our work cut out if we're going to attempt to neutralize the debt dragon. And neutralize them, I think we must, if we're going to achieve a financial health that honors God. We must say, you know what, I'm going to get some control over this. I'm going to honor God with this so that I can live in a way that honors Him. I think it's the best way for us to equip ourselves for this challenge is by asking 4 questions. And so let me pose 4 questions this morning and just kind of think on these and wrestle with these a little bit. First one is, why is this dragon so big? Why is the dragon a debt? Now, there are many reasons of why this is probably so big, but let me just give you 3 that I think are kind of top of the list type reasons. First of all, our entire culture is set up to encourage debt. The best example of this is a typical car commercial. After showing you this vehicle, how it'll perform so spectacularly on curvy mountain roads, it'll go from 0 to 60 in less time than it takes for you to brush your teeth or tie your shoe. The voiceover artist informs that you can take this car home shockingly for a low monthly payment with no interest. And pay on it for like the next 8 years now, or 9 years. I don't know. They're doing loans longer and longer. Of course, he fails to tell you that you'll still be making those payments long after that car has become now a beater car, and you're still paying for it. According to Edmunds.com, about 1/3 of car owners owe about $5,000 more than their vehicle is actually worth. So that's called being upside down. When you go to make a trade, you can't do it because you're like, I'm in a mess. I can't handle this because the car is not really worth what I still owe. You probably also receive credit cards in the mail. Offers with this microscopic small interest rate. You get this for 6 months, you get this for 9 months. Go down a real fine print. After that 9 months introductory rate or 12-month introductory rate, well, it jumps to 22% or 24%, or as a gentleman told me leaving, 29%. And they make it sound like, oh, this is all great. And so what we do, we just go and run that piece of plastic over and over and over again. And then we go, wait a minute, I'm so far behind, I can't get caught up. There's also companies like Disney that you know can't afford for you to fork over the cash to buy season tickets or to make the vacation. And so they will happily set you up on a payment plan to go see Mickey Mouse. That's what they do. Come visit our mouse. Come. We'll make sure you can come. Don't worry about it. You can pay it all off later. And the list goes on. One after another, businesses large and small provides ways for us to have things that we really can't afford, but we say yes to. Brings us to the second reason why I think the debt dragon is so big, because many people lack contentment. If you're not content in life, you will chase the debt dragon. The commercials and the flyers and offers mentioned above are effective because large numbers of people feel like something is missing in their lives. Many people have a hole in their heart and they try to fill it by outside things. And instead of looking inward to figure out what's going on, which is always the problem, they tend to look outward and try to play right in the hands of advertisers. Many times because of the hole in our heart, we go to drugs and alcohol and illicit sex and overeating, and the list goes on. And one in that list many times is overspending. Because if you're not content in Jesus, you will continue to chase after the things of this world. But when you come to a saving relationship with Jesus and you learn how to walk in Jesus, that's why we say our mission around here is help people find and follow. This is part of following Jesus. When you learn how to follow Jesus, then you won't look at that exercise machine that costs more than a month's salary. You'll say, you know what, I know I don't need that. Because you're going to keep chasing after Jesus and walk in contentment, knowing who you are in Jesus. I mean, who among us hasn't watched those commercials with a hint of longing? Who hasn't heard the inner voice whispering, telling us how happy we would be if we could just do that or we could have that? All of us wrestle with that. See that commercial, see that advertising, see that social media advertising. All of us are pulled into that. The third debt dragon, or third reason why I think we have this debt dragon, is many people are looking for stress relief. We live in a stressed out society. Just walking around here today, shaking hands. I probably had 5 people. I said, how you doing? Oh, I'm so stressed. That's the society we live in. That's the culture we live in. I heard a story about a woman whose husband counted over 100 brand new outfits of hers that still had tags attached, hanging in various closets throughout the house. He said every time she had a bad day, she went shopping. Took off and went shopping to make her feel better. Now, guys, don't throw the elbows at your wives too fast, because we're just as guilty. You've probably heard the statement before. You've heard the old saying, the only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. Because us guys, we're just as guilty. We just go to different stores. You see us at Dick's Sporting Goods, Bass Pro Shop, Best Buy, or going on the golf trip that we really can't afford. Because the things make us feel good for a little while. Do you see yourself in any of these reasons? Probably all of us can say, yeah, I can see some of that in me. It's time to do some serious soul searching. The quest to financial health that honors God is doomed if we don't learn to stop feeding the dragon. Here's the second question for us to consider today. Is the debt dragon evil? Is it evil? Is it sinful to have debt? And here's where you might be surprised. Debt is not inherently evil. It is not inherently sinful. Several passages, I think, make this clear. Deuteronomy 15, God was instructing the Israelites, which were his people, on how they should conduct themselves in the promised land. And he says, the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised. You will lend money to many nations, but will never need to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will not rule over you. Now think about it. If debt were inherently evil, or if it was sinful, would God have instructed his people to lend to other nations and put them into a sin relationship? Of course not. He wouldn't have said, hey, this is one way to manage finances. He would not have said that. He would have said, no, don't lend to anybody. He would have said, no debt's allowed. I don't want my people to have debt at all. Some people point to Romans 13 and try to prove that, well, debt's a sin. It's wrong to have a debt. And here's what it says. Owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. But if you check the context, what the Apostle Paul was talking about in that text, Paul was talking about relationships and not finances. He was talking about having clean relationships where there's love and there's no challenge there. I think a much more relevant statement comes from Jesus in Matthew 5, where he says, give to those who ask and do not turn away from those who want to borrow. So he's talking about, how do I love people? Well, if you have the resources, just give it to them. If you have the resource, you're not using it right now, go ahead and lend it to them. And so Jesus even has some in his speech, like, some lending, you can do that. And so the Bible doesn't teach that debt is evil or that debt is sinful. Now, all my financial people in the room, I'm looking around going, I'm seeing all my financial eyes staring at me like, Brian, where are you going with this? Because Dave Ramsey says you can't have any kind of debt. I understand that. But the Bible clearly teaches that debt is dangerous. Debt is dangerous. It's like you're playing with fire. Proverbs 22 says, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. Some translations say slave to the lender. So when you start taking on debt, you then have somebody who you owe. And so when you start owing people, all of a sudden you become that servant to them. And it goes on in Proverbs 22, says, don't agree to guarantee another person's debt or put up security for someone else. If you can't pay it, even your bed will be snatched from under you. In other words, you get too many debts, it's all taken away. And if you've ever been through bankruptcy, you understand that. You understand, man, I had everything or had something repossessed or taken back because you haven't paid your debt. It's so important to understand that just because something isn't evil doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. And we've got to know the difference. Some things are not sinful, but God warns us in His Word, you may not want to play with this fire. For instance, a car, for example, it's not evil. If you came here today, you probably came in a car. Some of you may have rode your bike or walked, but most were in a car. And it's not evil, but would we agree it's dangerous? More people die in car accidents per year than any other way of travel. And so, yeah, a car can be dangerous, especially if you're 16-year-olds learning to drive. It's very dangerous, right? Or you just drive recklessly, or somebody else does. Medication, for instance, it's not evil. It's okay to take some medicine, but it can be really dangerous if you take too much or don't follow what the doctor prescribes. And so all of a sudden you can mess up your life by mistaking medicine. The ladder in your garage, it isn't evil, but about 300 people die a year falling off of it, and about another 160,000 end up in the hospital. So it's not evil, but it's dangerous, so you better be careful. We've been doing some remodeling in our house, and so I've been pulling out saws that I'm not real special used with it, and every time I'm cutting, okay, are your fingers back? Are your fingers back? Because I want to keep them. I like the tips of my fingers. Not evil, but it's extremely dangerous. Same with debt. It's not evil, but it's really dangerous. And just because something isn't evil doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. Here's question number 3. Could the debt dragon actually ever help me? What if I use some debt to my advantage? Because some financial advisors will tell you, some debt's not bad. You got to use it, but you got to use it wisely. And some in the Christian world, I think, have been guilty, and I think I've even said it before in previous years of teaching or whatever, don't have any debt, it's awful, it's terrible. That's not necessarily true. If you're wise about it, it's always better if you can keep from going into debt. But in some situations, some debt, I think if it passes 3 tests, you may say, okay, maybe this is a wise debt and God's going to be okay with it. Here's test number 1. Is the item you're borrowing against going to go up in value or help you earn an income? Got to stop and think. This thing I'm going to buy, okay, let me tell you right now, Starbucks drink will not help. It won't. The new clothes you're going to go buy, that doesn't help. But you say, honey, time to buy a house. I need a mortgage. Most of us probably don't have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 sitting around a bank. I can just walk in and pay cash. If your goal is to buy a house with cash, that's a great goal. I'm not telling you will never achieve it, but most won't achieve that. And you say, okay, well, we're going to borrow some money to get a mortgage. Well, that may be a wise investment, a wise debt, because the housing mortgage over the last 20, 30-year spans has been this way forever in American culture. It will grow around 4 to 6% rate. Now, here in the last few years, it's grown even way beyond that. As you watch housing markets just skyrocketing still. And so that may be considered a reasonable debt that I borrowed some money in order to be able to move in that area. Now, you got to make sure, though, that your monthly payment does not exceed 28% of your take-home gross pay. That includes your taxes, your insurance, and your mortgage. Where we get messed up is you're shopping for a house, and you know you should be at the $200,000 house, but you get excited about the $300,000 house, and you think, oh, I can figure that out, and we're going to make it work. For example, if you make $75,000 a year, that's a monthly income of $6,250, your monthly payment must not exceed $1,750. Isn't that true, my ABC Dave Ramsey guys, right? 28%. Someone said, well, I can stretch it to 30%, 32. I can go to 35%. You're going to become house poor. And then instead of loving your house, you're going to hate your house because you can't do anything in life. And so there's some wisdom about how much should I have. Here's test number 2. Is the item you're borrowing against worth more than the debt? A lot of people like to speculate. They borrow money to buy something because they say, oh, it's going to go up in value. But you don't know that for sure. Because the economy changes and times change. And one thing can be valuable this day or this year, and the next year it crashes and is not valuable. But what happens if it has no value is suddenly you're stuck with a debt that is devastating to your family. Be careful of slick salespeople who say, oh, go ahead and buy this. It's going to go up in value. Really? How do you know that it's going to go up in value? There's no guarantee of that. Suddenly you're stuck with a debt that's devastating to your finances. A simple rule of thumb to follow is simply to never borrow more money than an item you're buying is actually worth. Don't ever do more. That sounds simple, I know, but the problem is there's all this slick marketing that gets us to think, I'll buy it and it's going to go up in value. You have to be careful. Here's test number 3. Is the debt load you're taking on manageable on your current income? Have you ever said something like this? We can afford the payment if we just cut back in other areas. Oh, honey, if we just cut this out, we'll be all right. We'll be able to handle that payment. If those words come out of your mouth when you're thinking about buying something, you shouldn't buy it. Listen to that voice. Listen to that wisdom. You're actually admitting that it doesn't fit. It's like saying, well, if I don't wear socks and if I curl up my toes and if I don't mind getting blisters, I can squeeze my feet into this new pair of shoes that I really want. You would never do that. You're looking at a shelf and you're like, oh man, they only have a 10, but I need an 11. I love the shoe, but there's no way I can wear that shoe. I'm not going to enjoy it. And so you won't do that. So nobody's right mind would buy shoes like that. So we should not operate with our finances like that. Listen, don't do it. You got to be wise enough and mature enough to say no. Sometimes we as adults need to learn to parent ourselves and tell ourselves, I'm not going to do it. It's not a wise decision. It's not a debt I should take on. It's dangerous. I'm not going to go in that direction. The 4th question I have for you today, this debt thing's out of control in my life. I know I need to get it under control. How can I subdue this debt dragon? How can I get control of it? Well, first, live by these 2 acronyms. Debt is a dumb explanation for buying things. If you remember that, every time you pull that piece of plastic out, then you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, should I buy that? Several years ago, Discover sent me a thing and, new card. You can design your own card. Oh, that's cool. I like to do some design stuff. So I design a card and I put that on it. On the card, I put dumb explanation for buying things. And I submitted it. I'm waiting for my card to come. You know what came in the mail? Sorry, your design was not approved. Because they want me to use the card. I could have put anything else on it. They would have said yes. They would have approved it. And if you remember that cash always saves heartache, you're going to be way ahead of the game. Now, I know most of us probably don't walk around carrying cash. We went to a garage sale yesterday. I'm like, do you take Venmo? They're like, no, I don't go out cash. I'm like, I don't have any cash. And a lot of us are like that, right? What I'm talking about, what's in your bank account? What's in your checking account? Do you have enough you can pay for it right now? And when you get that item, you go, it's paid for. I don't have to worry about making the payment next month or 6 months or 6 years down the road. And so if you live by debt is dumb explanation for buying things and cash always saves heartache, you'll take care of a whole lot of stuff in your life. Secondly, make an irrevocable commitment to God and to yourself that you're going to get out of debt. If it's strangleholding you, you draw a line in the sand, you say no more. We're done buying. No more cash. No more buying, only cash. No more purchases. We're going to live on, as Dave Ramsey says, what? Rice and beans. Rice and beans, rice and beans. I'm going to simplify my life. There's no more steaks in my life. It's going to be rice and beans. Hebrews 13 says, don't be obsessed with getting more material things. Be relaxed with what you have. In other words, stop looking at the Joneses because they have a whole bunch of stuff and they probably have a whole bunch of debt and say, I'm not going to chase that anymore. I'm not going to keep chasing after stuff. Thirdly, put God first in your giving. Quite honestly, I think this might be the most important one. Proverbs 3 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, then your barns. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. There's a promise. You honor God with your wealth, with your income, put Him first, then He blesses you. Here's what I've seen in 30 years of ministry. Most people who are not honoring God say, I just can't afford to. What do you mean you can't afford to? Well, I got this car, and I got this debt, and I got this, and I got this vacation, I got this. And so we say all that stuff is before God versus God, you're first. You want to get your finances in line? This is the number one principle. You say, God, you're first, and then I'm going to start figuring out how to pay everything else by putting everything else second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and on down the line. And so God makes a promise to us. Put me first, and I'll take care of you. Fourthly, don't take on any more debt. Proverbs 27, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. So do you see the dangers of the debt dragon? And if you see the dangers, you go, listen, I'm not going to take on anymore. I'm going to stay away from it. I'm going to work with what I have. I'm going to pay it down, and I'm going to get rid of it. I had someone first service, as we were leaving, they said, I've got all my debts paid off. I said, that's awesome. Person was 76 years old. I said, I hope when I'm 76, I have them all paid off too. They said, when I was your age, I didn't have them all paid off. They said, but we made a plan, and we said, we're going to stick to that plan. We're going to work that plan so we can get these debts paid down. So when you're 70, 75, 76, hopefully 60, 65, maybe even younger, you say, I've got this stuff tackled. You got to develop a written plan, a budget. You got to keep track of how you're going to spend your money. You give every dollar a name. Proverbs 14 says, a simple man believes anything, but a prudent man gives thought to his steps. He's talking about a plan. Proverbs 21 says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. I'm always amazed when I get a conversation with someone, they come to me, Pastor, hey, we need some help, and you start talking about some finances, they're like, I don't know where my money goes. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I know I got a rent payment or mortgage payment. Beyond that, I don't know. It runs out. What do you mean it just runs out? Like, where's it going? I don't know. Okay, can we find out where your money's going? Because I don't think it has legs. It doesn't just take off. It doesn't just get up and go. Somewhere it's being spent. And many people operate in this life not really knowing. They just kind of got it in their head. You need a plan. Now, here's the good thing. There's so much help out there for plans. There's apps you can look up. There's programs on a computer you can get. There's Excel spreadsheets. And you know what still works today? Pencil and paper. You're like, I'm not a technology person. You don't have to. Just get pen and paper out and start figuring out how much am I spending? How much do I have coming in? Where's all my money going? And then if you have a plan, you can start to tackle the debt dragon. Number 6, sometimes we've got to adjust our lifestyle. Nothing's going to change in our life until you make a change in your life. It's just not going to change until you say, God, with your help, I'm making some changes. A doctor in another congregation tells this story. He said he was working 70, 80 hours a week, and it was destroying him. So he made the choice to reduce his practice by 20%. Listen to what he writes. He says, it was significant adjustment in our lifestyle, a drop in salary over $40,000. But it has been more than worth it. My daughter really would not know me if I had not made the change. My marriage would be riddled with problems as well. I keep a little file of what I bought for $40,000 a year. I bought seeing my daughter smile and laugh when I arrive home. Afternoons with my wife. Daddy-daughter dates. A marriage not on the brink of divorce. And he concludes, $40,000 is cheap for priceless relationships, family, and memories. For some, it's just, I got to cut back because I'm chasing all of it and I'm working my tail off and I have no life and I have no relationships and my family and my friends are suffering. We've got to make adjustments. We don't have to go out to eat every night. You know that? I know. That's our culture today. Our culture today is, I'm too busy. I'm running like crazy. Run through the fast food. Stop and get a pizza. And all of a sudden, you're just throwing out on credit card. All of a sudden, you look back. There was an exercise we did with our kids because when they started having jobs and they were spending money. Now, they were spending their debit card. But they didn't realize how much coffee at Starbucks was and a McDonald's sandwich here and Chick-fil-A, goodness gracious, that stuff is addicting. You go get more and more Chick-fil-A. And so I said, okay, I want you all to keep track. I did this all three, Caleb, Luke, and Lily Grace. I want you to keep track how much you just go and buy food that's just kind of filtered away. They're like, what? And every single one of them, it was over $300 a month just on junk like that. I said, we can't keep doing that. But they had to see it. And once they saw it, they went, oh, we got to draw that back, don't they? And now Lily Grace, bless her heart, she's telling Mom the other day, my friends at college are going out. I told them, I'm not going out. Why? Because my mom and dad don't just give me a whole bunch of money, go in my checking account. I got to spend my own money. But it helps if we know where our dollars are going. You know, some people think it's poor stewardship to let a coupon expire. Some of you are catching up to that. It's okay. They can expire or to miss the sale. Yes, you may save 30% or 40% or 50%. My wife and I have this debate sometimes. She'll be like, Brian, it's on sale. I'm like, yeah, I save 100% if we don't buy any of it. And then she'll say, you can't go to Kroger. Why? Because I love Kroger deals. I'll go in, I'll be shopping through the line, and it was 10 for this and 10 for that, and I'd fill up the cart, and I go home. She's like, Brian, that's the same sale all the time. That's not a special deal. That's the price. What do you mean? They told me it was 10 for this and 10 for that, so I'm not allowed to go grocery shopping. I'm a terrible grocery shopper. My cart gets too filled. You got to make the needed adjustments to your lifestyle. It'll pay dividends. 7, you got to systematically pay off your debts. Some say start with the smallest and get the snowball going. Some say start with the largest interest rate. I don't know which is best. I'm not your financial advisor, but for sure you got to have a plan to say, I'm going to tackle these debts and I'm going to tackle them wisely. And 8thly, I would suggest you got to find a friend to hold you accountable. I've never known anybody who's doing well financially without having a financial advisor or a coach or someone who's wiser. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's whoever can be a friend within church who says, I got somebody I bounce some ideas to. I called one of my advisors the other day, just a friend of mine. I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And just on the phone, they said, okay, have you thought about this? No, I haven't thought about that. Okay, you got to get that down on paper, that down on paper, that down on paper, that down on paper, and then let's talk. And by the time we got done talking, I was like, okay, you already told me what I'm thinking about. It's really stupid. Don't do it. Because an advisor starts talking to you and gives you wisdom about what to think about. And we all need that. Maybe in your small group you're talking about this topic, and you start hearing somebody in the group saying, this is where I used to be, here's where I am, I'm having great success, it's working. And you look at that person and say, would you help me? What it takes is dropping pride. It takes dropping our ego. So you know what? That means I got to open up my pocketbook to you, and I got to show you where I'm spending money. Yep. If you know that friend's going to love you and not condemn you, you go, hey, I'm an open book. I'll show you where my expenses are so we can get control of this together. I know some of you are thinking, this all sounds nice, preacher. And I like the idea of getting out of debt. I like the idea of maybe really getting a handle on all this kind of stuff. But Brian, you don't understand. You don't understand my choices. You don't understand the curveball life's thrown at me. It wasn't my plan to go down this road, and now because I went down this road, I have this challenge, and I just feel like there's no hope for me to ever get out of debt. It's just a mess, and even though you're giving me the suggestions, I can't see it. Let me show you why there's hope. I think there's hope for everybody in this room, no matter what your situation is. In 2 Kings 4, we're told about a widow who came to the prophet Elisha with just the kind of problem we're talking about. The debt dragon had her cornered because her husband had died unexpectedly, and she was left with all the unpaid bills. And her creditors were breathing down her neck, and they were actually threatening to take her 2 sons and make them slaves. If you can't take the bills, your sons are going to come work for us. They'll be our slaves. And that's how you're going to have to pay off your debts. Can you imagine the stress? It's like the phone that just keeps ringing because you owe bills. You're like, I can't answer the phone again. I don't want anyone else to bother me. But Elisha, the prophet of God, gave her some curious instructions. He says, here, I want you to do. I want you to take your sons and you send them out in the community, out in the neighborhood. Go door to door, knock on the door and say, can we have your jars? You got any extra jars around? Any extra jars? And just collect them up and you bring them to the house. Bring them to the house. Get all the jars you can, bring them to the house. He said, then I want you to take your flask. A flask is what held oil. It was about this big, approximately. And oil had a lot of value. I want you to take your flask, and then I want you to start filling the jars with oil. I want you to pour in that. And you send your boys out door by door, or however it is, get as many as you can. So the 2 sons are out knocking on doors, and they're, can I have your jars? My mom needs your jars. I have your jars. Gather all the jars, brings all the jars in, put them on the table, and she's filling it, she's filling it. They're out getting more jars. She continues to fill, continues to fill, continues to fill, continues to fill. Now the flask is only this big, and she just keeps on pouring, keeps filling every single jar. And finally the boys come and say, Mom, we've hit every door we can. We've talked to everybody we can, and we don't see that there's any more jars left. Okay, well, I'll just keep on filling. She got down to the very last one, and her flask ran empty. Okay, now Elisha, now what am I supposed to do? Sell it, you'll make money off of it, and keep what you can for your family to meet your needs. So she went and sold it. She paid off all of her bills, took care of all of her challenges in life, all the financial challenge she was having, and then she had oil for herself. Now, I love this story because I think it reminds us of 2 great truths. One, there is no such thing as a hopeless situation as long as God is on the throne. Do you believe that? Wherever you're at today, you come in here today and I said, we got to have a bit of a tough conversation. Let me end with some encouraging words for you. Your situation is not so tough that God can't handle it. And you're not walking alone. Things may seem hopeless. Others might be writing you off. You might be ready to throw in the towel. Vultures may be circling overhead. But our God has a history of rescuing his people. From the Red Sea to the blazing furnace to a lion's den to a desperate widow's empty cupboards, God has shown his power is greater than any problem we may face. And you must believe that if you're going to have financial health that honors God. God, I'm going to do it your way. And secondly, God is most likely to do what he can when we're doing what we can. See, the clear truth of this story is that the widow hadn't been borrowing the jars. She could have said to Elisha, you're crazy. I'm not sending my sons out to go knock on doors to get jars. Why would I do that? That is so embarrassing to go ask for jars. Who's going to actually let us have their jars? Nobody's going to let us have a jar. Elisha, you're out of your head. That makes no sense. And you want me to use my flask to put oil in? Elisha, I only have this much oil. That's not going to work. You're out of your head. Could have been a response. It wasn't. Her response was, okay. I imagine in the back of her head, she's thinking, this makes no sense to me. This prophet's out of his head. He's crazy, but he is a prophet of God. And so I'll choose humility. I'll choose to follow. I'll choose to do what God has directed me to do through the prophet Elijah. And when she did her part, God stepped in and did his part. For some in this room, your part might be, I need help. And there's help. And you might have to just ask for help. One of the hardest things to do is to humble yourself and say, I need help. If you send an email to one of our elders, send an email maybe to your group leader, you send an email to me or call or text or whatever, one of our staff members and say, hey, that financial thing, I need help. We're not going to condemn you. We're going to walk with you. We're going to come alongside. We have I'm looking in this room right now, and I see about 4 or 5 people in our room right now that are kind of our financial people that do a good job. Teach our Dave Ramsey class, and several of them have. And if I would call them up and say, hey, I got somebody who needs help, they've already told me, hey, Brian, if you get someone, I'll partner with them. I'll walk with them. I'll help them figure out a budget, and I'll help them figure out. And they're not going to condemn you because they want you to have success that they've been having. But you know what? It starts with you. It starts with you picking up and saying, I need help, because we don't know who needs help until you speak up. That's what she learned. That's what she learned. She learned, hey, I need help, and God sent her help. It may seem unconventional. It may not make sense. But if you're willing to say, I'm going to do it God's way, you'll be amazed how much God will take care of it. So all this begs the question, if you are diligent in doing the simple things that are within your power, what might God do in response? He just might bless you. I believe he will. He might even cause things to work out in your favor. Time will tell, because it's hard to know, like, okay, what it's going to look like. You start doing things God's way, all of a sudden a month down the road, and 6 months down the road, and all of a sudden a year down the road, and all of a sudden 5 years down the road, you're like, hey, at this time I started doing it God's way. Man, my life has turned upside down because I'm honoring God and my finances. And considering his long history of taking care of his children, especially his children who are in dire straits, I think we have every reason to trust him and every reason to be optimistic. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you